Hey everyone, and welcome back to Librarian Oasis. I'm Joshua.
And I'm Eleanor.
Today we're going to be diving into a book that I think is just fascinating. It's called Brain Rules for Baby by John Medina.
Yeah, this book is like a must-read for any parent
Yeah.
or grandparent. Or really anyone who's ever wondered, how these little tiny humans develop and grow. And Medina's writing is just so engaging. He's got this way of weaving together the hard science with real life examples, and it just makes everything click.
And that's exactly what we're going to try to do today.
Yeah.
Explore some of those key ideas from the book, starting, all the way back in pregnancy and going through those early years of childhood.
Right.
Now, I have to admit, even before I had kids, I've just always been fascinated by this whole process of child development. How does this, tiny little clump of cells turn into this walking, talking, thinking being? It's just incredible.
Yeah, it really is amazing. And Medina starts right at the beginning with pregnancy. And he calls this stage, healthy mom, healthy baby. And it's all about this idea that creating a healthy environment for a baby actually starts before they're even born.
I like that.
So, just you wouldn't plant a seed in crummy soil. You want to make sure that the environment is rich and nourishing for that little brain to grow.
Okay, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that moms-to-be can do to create that optimal environment?
Well, Medina talks a lot about nutrition. And you know that old saying, you are what you eat?
Right.
Yeah, it's especially true during pregnancy
Okay.
because the foods you choose are directly impacting your baby's developing brain. He really highlights omega-3 fatty acids.
Oh, yeah. I've heard those are important.
Yeah, they're crucial for brain development.
Okay, so load up on the salmon. Got it.
Exactly.
Now, I've also heard a lot about managing stress during pregnancy. Is that something that Medina addresses in the book?
Oh, absolutely. He actually dedicates a whole section to stress. And he explains how stress hormones, like cortisol, can actually cross the placenta and affect the baby's developing brain, particularly the areas that are responsible for emotional regulation.
So if a mom is constantly stressed, the baby is basically bathing in those stress hormones.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. And you can imagine, if you're in this constant state of fight or flight, it's not exactly conducive to learning and growing.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what are some effective ways to manage stress during pregnancy? I mean, it's already a pretty stressful time to begin with.
Right. Well, Medina emphasizes finding healthy coping mechanisms. So, things like exercise, relaxation techniques, spending time in nature, connecting with supportive friends and family. All of these things can help buffer the effects of stress. And he even mentions, moderate aerobic exercise can actually have a positive impact on both mom and baby's brain health.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got nutrition, stress management. What else is crucial during this pregame stage? Yeah.
Well, Medina also kind of debunks a lot of the myths surrounding pregnancy. Remember all those products that claim to boost fetal brain development?
Yeah, like Mozart for babies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It basically says, there's no scientific evidence to support any of that.
Okay, so skip the fancy gadgets and just focus on the basics. A healthy lifestyle and a supportive environment.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now, once that baby actually arrives, things get real.
Right.
I imagine the transition to parenthood is a bit of a shock to the system, even for the most prepared couples.
Oh, for sure. And Medina acknowledges this right away in his second chapter, which is called Relationship. He even goes so far as to say that the most important factor in raising a smart and happy child isn't fancy toys or educational videos. It's actually the relationship between the parents.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, if the parents are constantly stressed out and arguing, that's going to create this tense, unpredictable environment for the baby.
Right. It's not exactly a recipe for calm and secure little one. And he points out that marital satisfaction actually often takes a nosedive after having a baby. And it's not because, the parents suddenly stop loving each other. It's more like this perfect storm of sleep deprivation, social isolation, often an unequal division of labor. All of these things can lead to resentment and conflict.
And let's be real. Those first few months are such a whirlwind of diaper changes, feedings.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what that baby is trying to tell you.
Oh, yeah.
It's no wonder relationships take a hit.
Right. But Medina offers a solution, and it all boils down to empathy. He says couples need to become masters at understanding and responding to each other's needs.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, it's like learning a new language, the language of your partner's emotional world.
Right, I'm intrigued. How do we become fluent in emotional language? Do we have to sign up for some kind of relationship boot camp?
Not exactly. But Medina offers like a practical two-step approach. The first step is to pay attention to your partner's cues. So you know, what are their facial expressions telling you? Their tone of voice. Are they withdrawing? Or are they seeking connection?
Okay.
Once you've tuned into those cues, the next step is to try to understand the reason behind those emotions. And don't be afraid to verbalize that understanding, to say something like, hey, it seems like you're feeling overwhelmed because you've been handling most of the nighttime feedings.
So it's not just about saying, I see that you're stressed. It's about acknowledging the reason behind it.
Exactly. It shows your partner that you're not just observing their emotions, you're actually trying to get where they're coming from. And Medina argues that this kind of empathetic communication can be a game changer for a relationship, especially, during those early years of parenthood.
It's like building a strong foundation for a house. You need that solid base to support everything else. Okay, so we've got the parents on board. They're communicating. They're being empathetic. Now, what about the baby's brain? What's happening in that little noggin?
That's where Medina's next chapter comes in, and he calls it Smart Baby Seeds. And it's all about, the amazing world of a baby's developing brain. And he really emphasizes that babies aren't just these passive recipients of information. They're actually active learners. They're constantly exploring and making sense of the world around them.
So all those little hands reaching for everything, those curious eyes taking it all in, that's not just random. It's actually them learning.
Exactly. And Medina uses this analogy of the baby's brain as this fertile field waiting to be cultivated. But before we get to the cultivating part, he emphasizes the importance of creating a sense of safety and security. He says, a baby's primary focus is survival, and feeling safe is paramount to that survival.
That makes sense. If you're constantly worried about danger, you're not going to be very open to exploring and learning new things.
Yeah.
But how does that translate into real-life parenting?
So Medina explains that when a baby feels threatened, their brain triggers this stress response, releasing hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. And these hormones are essential for survival, in truly dangerous situations. But chronic stress can actually hinder a baby's ability to learn and grow.
It's like constantly putting on the brakes.
Exactly.
So creating a safe and nurturing environment isn't just about providing for their physical needs. It's also about making sure they feel emotionally secure and loved.
Right. So it's about responding to their cries with care, providing comfort and reassurance when they're distressed, and creating a predictable and consistent routine. This sense of safety actually frees up their brains to focus on learning and exploring.
Okay. So we planted the seeds, we've created this safe and nurturing environment. What's next? How do we actually cultivate those seeds of intelligence?
Well, that's where Smart Baby Soil comes in.
Okay.
This is where Medina digs into the specific things that parents can do to foster their child's cognitive development. And he starts with something surprisingly simple. Talk, talk, talk.
Wait, so you mean narrating my day to a baby who doesn't even understand words yet?
Exactly. Medina emphasizes this incredible power of language, and he says the amount and quality of language that a baby hears directly impacts their language development and even their future academic success. He even gives a gold standard for parents. Aim for 2,100 words per hour.
Oh, wow. 2,100 words. I'm going to need to start carrying a word count around. Seriously, though, that makes me think about all those fancy baby toys and videos that are marketed as educational tools. What's Medina's take on all of that?
Well, he's pretty clear. He says those things are not a substitute for real human interaction.
Okay.
Yeah, instead of relying on screens or structured activities, he encourages parents to embrace the power of play. You know what he calls mature, dramatic play.
Mature, dramatic play. I like that. What is that exactly?
So think about kids building forts out of blankets, creating these elaborate stories with their toys, or pretending to be doctors, firefighters. It's all about imagination, creativity, problem solving.
So it's less about rote memorization and more about letting kids explore, experiment, learn through play.
Exactly.
Which sounds like a lot more fun than flashcards.
Right. And the research actually backs this up. Medina talks about a program called Tools of the Mind, which incorporates this kind of play into preschool education. And the results are impressive. Kids who participate in this program show significant gains in their cognitive development, especially in areas like self-regulation, planning, and working memory.
It's not about ditching academics altogether, but just finding ways to make learning engaging.
Right.
Now, speaking of learning, one thing I've always wondered about is how to praise kids in a way that encourages growth and doesn't create a fear of failure. Does Medina address that at all?
Oh, he does, and this is a really important point. He argues that instead of praising kids for being smart, which can actually lead to what's called a fixed mindset, we should praise their effort and perseverance.
Okay,
And this fosters what's called a growth mindset, which is the belief that intelligence isn't fixed. It's something that you can develop through hard work and dedication.
I see. So if a kid is constantly told they're smart, they might become afraid to try new things or take on challenges because they don't want to look not smart.
Exactly.
But if you praise their effort, you're sending this message that it's okay to struggle. It's okay to make mistakes as long as you keep trying.
Exactly. And he gives this really compelling example of this boy named Ethan, who, after being consistently praised for his intelligence, starts to struggle when he encounters subjects that require more effort. And because he's internalized this fixed mindset, he starts to think, well, I guess I'm not smart anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And it highlights these, like, unintended consequences of praising intelligence over effort.
Okay. So instead of saying you're so smart, we should focus on acknowledging their hard work and resilience. Like, wow, you really stuck with that problem even when it got tough. I'm so proud of you for not giving up.
Exactly. You're focusing on the process rather than just the outcome.
Okay. I like that. Well, this has been so insightful already. We've covered a lot of ground, from the importance of a healthy pregnancy to the power of play and praising effort. And we're just getting started. In our next segment, we'll dive into Medina's insights on raising a happy and moral child. So stick around. There's much more to come.
Yeah, this is great. Let's take a quick break to process all this amazing information. All right, so we're back and ready to jump into the next part of Medina's book, which he calls Happy Baby Seeds.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Like what does it actually mean to raise a child who not only, develops intellectually, but also thrives emotionally and socially?
Right. And Medina just comes right out and says it. He says the single best predictor of happiness is having friends.
Okay, so friends are important. I think we all kind of knew that. But what makes those friendships, work?
Yeah, it's more than just like having playmates, right?
Right.
It actually takes specific skills, and luckily, those are things that we can help children develop.
Okay, so thinking back to my own childhood, some of those early friendships were kind of a mess. I definitely could have used some guidance on how to, handle those relationships. So what are those like key ingredients for building healthy relationships? And how do we as parents actually, foster them?
Medina highlights two things: emotional regulation and empathy. So let's start with emotional regulation, which is basically the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your emotions.
Okay.
It's like we're not born knowing how to handle those big, overwhelming feelings.
I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, and as parents, we've all seen those epic meltdowns, right? The toddler tantrum in the grocery store, the preschooler who like loses it because their toy broke. Those moments can be rough.
To say the least.
Yeah.
So what do we do? How do we help kids, learn to actually handle those big feelings?
Well, Medina says that dismissing or punishing those big emotions doesn't really teach kids how to manage them. We need to actually become like emotional coaches, helping them navigate those stormy seas.
Yeah, I like that, emotional coaches, yeah. So what does that look like in practice? Like, what are we actually doing?
It starts with simply acknowledging and validating their feelings. So you might say something like, I see that you're really angry that your block tower fell down, or it sounds like you're feeling disappointed because we can't go to the park today.
So we're helping them feel heard and understood.
Exactly. And that can really de-escalate the situation, because when we feel like someone gets us, it's easier to calm down.
Makes sense.
But it's not just about acknowledging the emotion. It's also about helping them understand what they're feeling.
Yeah.
Medina encourages parents to actually help kids label their emotions. He uses this great analogy of emotions as Post-it notes that the brain uses to tag important information.
So if a child is feeling scared, their brain is putting a scared Post-it note on that experience. And by helping them name that emotion, We're helping them make sense of what's going on in their brains and bodies.
Exactly. And over time, as they get better at identifying and labeling their emotions, they're better able to actually manage them.
Okay, so we've got emotional regulation down.
Mhm.
Now, what about empathy? How do we foster that ability to actually, like, understand and share the feelings of others?
So Medina dives into the science of empathy, and he talks about these things kind of mirror neurons. These are like specialized brain cells that fire both when we do an action and when we see somebody else doing that action.
Wait, so if I see you smile, the mirror neurons in my brain are firing as if I'm smiling myself.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. It's wild, right?
That's incredible.
And Medina suggests that these mirror neurons might actually be like the neurological basis for empathy. They allow us to quite literally feel what other people are feeling.
I'm thinking about those moments when you see like a little kid fall and scrape their knee and you just instinctively wince as if you're the one in pain. Our bodies are like wired to connect with others on an emotional level.
Right. And Medina argues that empathy, while it has these biological roots, is also a skill that we can actually nurture through our interactions with our kids.
Okay, so how do we create that happy baby soil? You know, what's the environment that actually cultivates empathy?
Medina emphasizes talking about feelings, both our own and our children's. We want to create this culture of emotional openness in our homes.
I love that. This reminds me of something my therapist once told me, name it to tame it. Like, by putting words to our emotions, we're taking away some of their power.
Yes, exactly. And Medina suggests that even simple things like reading stories together and talking about the characters' feelings can be so helpful. It's about exposing kids to a wide range of emotional experiences and helping them understand the complexity of human relationships.
And it's not just about talking about feelings,
Yeah.
right? We also have to model empathy in our own relationships.
Absolutely. Kids are always watching us. They're learning how to navigate the world based on our actions and reactions.
So if we want them to be kind and compassionate, we have to embody those qualities ourselves. Okay, we've talked about emotional regulation and empathy. What about morality? How do we raise kids who don't just know right from wrong, but actually, act in accordance with those values?
That's where Medina's chapter on moral baby comes in. And he starts by talking about this concept called theory of mind, which is basically the understanding that other people have their own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, which might be different from our own.
It's like realizing that everyone has their own internal world.
Exactly. And Medina says that this ability typically develops around age 3 or 4, and it's like this crucial milestone for moral development.
Yeah.
Because before kids develop theory of mind, they tend to see the world from this very egocentric perspective.
Right, like they're the center of the universe and everyone else is just a supporting character in their story.
Exactly. But as they start to understand that other people have their own thoughts and feelings, they can start to develop a sense of fairness and cooperation and consideration for others.
And that understanding is so important for navigating all those tricky social situations, right? Like sharing toys, taking turns, resolving conflicts.
Oh, absolutely. And Medina also talks about this interesting link between theory of mind and, get this, lying.
Oh,
Yeah. So once kids realize that other people can't see inside their minds, they discover that they can actually manipulate information and, tell little white lies.
I remember the first time my son told a blatant lie. I was like, wait a minute, where did that come from? But it was like this light bulb went off in his head. He realized he could say things that weren't true, and people might believe him.
It's a natural part of development, but it definitely throws parents for a loop sometimes. But Medina makes the point that lying isn't always a sign of, bad character.
Okay.
It can actually be a sign of cognitive sophistication because it shows the kid is starting to understand the difference between their perspective and the perspective of others.
So how do we as parents help our kids develop a strong moral compass? What are those moral baby soil conditions that actually promote moral growth?
Well, Medina is a big fan of what he calls authoritative parenting, which is a style that finds that balance between warmth and structure.
Okay, break that down for me. What does authoritative parenting look like in action?
Authoritative parents set clear rules and expectations, but they do it with warmth and understanding. They explain the reasons behind the rules, and they encourage kids to internalize those values rather than just obeying out of fear.
So it's not about being a dictator or laying down the law. It's about being more of a guide.
Exactly. And Medina contrasts this with authoritarian parenting, which is very strict with harsh punishments, and permissive parenting, which is all about warmth and acceptance, but without any boundaries.
So authoritative parenting is finding that sweet spot, right? between being too strict and too lenient.
Yes, it's about providing both structure and support. And within this style, Medina emphasizes clarity, acceptance, and power, which he calls CAP.
Okay, what does CAP stand for?
So C is for clarity. The rules are clear, they're reasonable, and everyone knows what they are. Sometimes it helps to even write them down and post them up.
Like a family constitution.
Exactly. Then A is for acceptance. Parents are warm and understanding when they enforce the rules. They acknowledge the child's perspective and feelings, even when those feelings are negative.
Okay.
And then P is for power. Medina emphasizes warmth and understanding, but he also acknowledges that sometimes a display of power is necessary to get a child's attention.
It's about being both loving and firm, right?
Exactly. And Medina also talks about discipline, and he makes this important distinction between negative reinforcement and punishment.
That's where things can get a little tricky, right?
Mhm.
Because there's so much debate about the right way to discipline kids.
Oh, yeah, it's a hot topic.
Mhm.
But Medina gives clear definitions to help parents understand the difference. So negative reinforcement is about removing something unpleasant to strengthen a desired behavior. Like, for example, he talks about this little girl who learned that throwing toys down the stairs would get her mom's attention, even if it was negative attention.
So the mom was accidentally reinforcing the bad behavior by giving the girl what she wanted, which was attention, even if it was in the form of scolding.
Exactly. In that situation, it would be more effective to ignore the negative behavior and focus on rewarding the positive behavior, like playing quietly.
I see.
And then punishment, on the other hand, is about using something unpleasant to weaken an undesired behavior.
Got it. So what are Medina's guidelines for effective punishment?
He outlines 4 key guidelines. First, the punishment should be related to the offense. So, if a child breaks a toy, the punishment might be taking away that toy.
Okay.
Second, it should be consistent. Every time the child does the undesired behavior, the same consequence happens. Third, it should be swift. The punishment happens immediately after the offense to create a clear connection.
Okay. And fourth?
And fourth, it should be explained. The parent calmly explains why the behavior was wrong and what the consequences are.
I see. So it's not just about punishing, it's about teaching.
Exactly. And Medina highlights the importance of what he calls inductive discipline, which is all about explaining the reasons behind the rules and helping kids understand how their actions affect others.
It's teaching them to think about the consequences of their choices, both for themselves and for other people.
Yes, and this kind of discipline is much more effective than just punishing without explanation because it helps kids actually internalize those moral values and develop empathy.
This has been so eye-opening. Medina's insights on raising happy and moral children are just so valuable. From the power of emotional coaching to the importance of authoritative parenting and inductive discipline, he gives us this roadmap for how to nurture kids who thrive.
I completely agree. And in our final segment, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Medina's brain rules for baby by talking about sleep and just some final thoughts on how to create that optimal environment for a child's developing brain.
Let's take a break here and come back. All right, so we're back. And there's one last topic from Brain Rules for a Baby that we just have to talk about. Sleep. I think any parent out there has a story or maybe a nightmare about those early days of sleep deprivation.
Oh, yeah, sleep. It's a big one. And Medina actually devotes a whole chapter to it. He calls it Sleepy Baby.
Mm-hmm.
He starts by acknowledging that, baby sleep is just totally different than adult sleep.
Right.
And it can be really confusing and frustrating and exhausting, especially for, new parents.
Yeah, those first few weeks or months even can feel like just this blur of constant wake-ups and like desperate attempts to get the baby back to sleep. Any advice from Medina on deciphering those mysterious baby sleep patterns?
Well, he explains that babies actually cycle through sleep stages way faster than adults do.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they start in what's called active sleep, which is kind of like REM sleep in adults.
Hmm?
And they might move around, make noises, even open their eyes. So it's not exactly the peaceful slumber that we picture. And then they transition into quiet sleep, which is that deeper, more restful sleep.
So it's like they're on fast forward when it comes to sleep cycles. No wonder they wake up more often.
Exactly.
So is there anything parents can do to encourage those longer stretches of, the quiet sleep?
Medina gives this really interesting tip. He says, when you notice your baby getting drowsy, resist the urge to put them down right away.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know it's tempting, but if you move them too soon, you can actually disrupt their transition into that deep sleep.
So those ninja-like skills that I've developed to, like, sneak out of the room undetected
Uh-huh, yeah.
might actually be backfiring.
Yeah, kinda. So patience is key. Wait till they're in that deep sleep before you even try to move them.
I know there's so much debate out there about different sleep training methods. Does Medina touch on that at all?
He does. He actually talks about two of the most popular approaches, the nurturing attachment philosophy, or NAP,
Mm-hmm.
and the cry it out method, or CIO. So NAP really emphasizes responding to a baby's cries right away, prioritizing that sense of security and comfort. CIO, on the other hand, suggests allowing the baby to cry for a set period of time to encourage them to self-soothe.
Okay, so two very different approaches. Does Medina say one is better than the other?
He presents both sides pretty fairly. He acknowledges the pros and cons of each, and he emphasizes that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. The best approach really depends on the parents and what feels right for their family.
Which is reassuring because I think it can feel so overwhelming to sort through all the, conflicting advice out there.
Right.
So when it comes to sleep, it's about finding what works for your family in consultation with your pediatrician.
Absolutely. And Medina also cautions against the most extreme form of CIO, which is sometimes called extinction. And that involves basically ignoring the baby's cries completely. And he points out that this approach can actually be harmful because it can undermine that sense of security and attachment.
It's a good reminder that babies aren't just tiny adults. They have their own ways of communicating, and we need to respond to their needs with sensitivity and care.
Well, we've covered so much in this deep dive into brain rules for baby. We talked about, creating a healthy pregnancy, fostering secure attachment, the power of play, nurturing a child's emotional intelligence. Medina offers just so many valuable insights.
It's such a great resource, and it's written in such a clear and engaging way. I really recommend this book to anyone who's interested in child development, parents, grandparents, educators, anyone who just wants to understand how those little minds work. Absolutely. And as we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave our listeners with this one question to think about. We've been talking about how this knowledge of child development can, inform our parenting practices. But what about the wider world? How could this knowledge change the way we approach things like, education, early childhood interventions, even societal policies that relate to children and families? The more we understand about how young brains develop, the better equipped we are to create environments that support them and help them, reach their full potential.
That's a great point. It's bigger than just individual families. It's about creating a world that supports all children.
Exactly. And on that note, we want to thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Brain Rules for Baby. We hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, happy reading.